Since my last Necromancer DPS video, I've spent a lot more time playing the class in real content, gotten 2 new trial trifectas on Necro, and so now I just have a lot more insight and comfortability with the class and wanted to do an update on the setup and the build. I really just have one core setup, swap a couple sets, and make a couple small skill changes depending on the environment and what I need for the fight. So I have a trash setup, my normal single target setup, a sweatier version with vampire toggle, a kind of hybrid setup for the fights that are kind of in between a pure cleave fight and a pure single target fight, then a pure cleave AoE boss setup, and then an easier Signet setup, and then finally an Arkasis or ulti-pull setup for generating ultimate between bosses or before a boss fight. Okay, I know that sounds like a lot, but the setups are really not that different from each other. Most of the skills stay the same, the rotation stays the same. It's mainly about choosing the right gear for the right job. This is where I've landed after getting more actual experience on the Crow, cleaning up my rotation a little bit, and then finally adding one of my new favorite sets. Well, it's not new, but it's new to me. Azure Blight into the mix. Real quick, before we get into the build, if this ends up helping you, please hit subscribe. It helps me keep making these. So here's the info that goes along with every setup. For race, I'm a Dark Elf. In my opinion, you're either a Dark Elf or a Khajiit with this build, and they're kind of interchangeable because on the Dark Elf setup, I basically run Fighting Finesse all the time because with my specific group, we weren't at the crit damage cap yet. Without it, if I was a Khajiit, I would be at the crit damage cap, so I would take off Fighting Finesse and put on Wrathful Strikes. For Mundus, the Thief, for more weapon and spell crit. For food, there's several options. The one I use the most is Hearty Garlic Corn Chowder. This is just pure max stam. You don't really need extra health on a Necro because you get a crazy amount of health already. So even with pure stam food, you're getting up to around like 28k health. If you're progging and you really need more health, you can do Braised Rabbit with spring vegetables. That gives health. If you're having trouble with resources, you can use Artaeum Takeaway Broth, which gives you health, stamina, and stam recov. Or you could use Lava Foot Soup and Saltreese, which gives you max stam and then stam recov. So yeah, a bunch of options depending on how you're playing and how your resources are. For potions, I typically use tripots, either crown ones or just ones you make that give health, stamina, and magicka back. In the more serious stuff where we're actually going for trifectas and things like that, I use Essence of Heroism, which give minor heroism and get you your ult back a little bit faster. But these are super expensive, and some groups already have minor heroism baked in the whole time, and you don't need to worry about wasting these, spending all that money. For attributes, it's 64 points into stamina. Champion points, using Fighting Finesse, I already kind of went over that. It's interchangeable with Wrathful Strikes depending on your crit damage. Exploiter, this is one of the best blue champion points in the game. If your group's off-balance time is good, which it's not that hard nowadays to get great off-balance timing, but sometimes in a pug group or things, people aren't proccing off-balance at all, and so then Exploiter would be totally useless, and so I would switch that out for something else. Then Master at Arms to increase direct damage, and then Biting Aura to increase your AoE attack damage. I also have Reaving Blows on here for when I'm doing the Vamp toggle. I'll get to that though. For the red CP, I use Celerity to move a bit faster, Slippery to automatically break free. This is really helpful in some fights where you just have to break free already. And then Rejuvenation for Recov, Fortified for armor. On Crow, I've found that Boundless Vitality isn't super helpful because you already have a ton of max health, so I stopped using that in favor of Slippery or Celerity. Your green CP doesn't matter, but I like Gifted Rider, War Mount, and Steed's Blessing. For all these setups, I'm using daggers on the front bar and either the Maelstrom Perfected Inferno staff on back bar or the Maelstrom Perfected Greatsword on the back bar, both of those infused. Those are kind of interchangeable depending on the fight. The Greatsword is going to do a bit more damage. The Destruction Staff AoE is a little bit bigger and gives you some range damage that you can do. So like on Basse, if you're in Portal killing Wraiths, I like to use Inferno Staff. There's also some fights where Stampede will get you killed if you don't know what you're doing. So it's probably better to start off most fights that you don't know on an Inferno Staff, and then once you know the fight, you can switch Stampede with the Greatsword. But if you just want max damage, always go Greatsword. Before I get too far ahead of myself, I want to talk through the class masteries I'm using. Nothing Wasted and Cycle Unending. Nothing Wasted gives you max health and weapon and spell damage, and that is ramping up, and it stacks up to 10 times. And then Cycle Unending upgrades your reusable parts to also grant you a new buff for 25 seconds, increasing your damage by 1% for every 1% health you have more than your target. And that caps out at 25%. And that does not mean like if you have 20k health and the enemy has 19k health. It doesn't matter about the actual HP points. It just cares about the percentage. So if I have 100% of my health, no matter what it is, and they have 75% of their health, I am getting a boost. Now, I don't know the actual math for this. I've actually heard that it's not doing as much damage as the tooltip would suggest, but I'm not exactly sure what that math is and what it looks like. If you guys know exactly how this damage ramps up and can explain it, please let me know in the comments. Thanks. All right, let's get into the main setups. This is my trash setup. For this, I'm using Zolzon, Velothi, Corpse Burster, a one-piece crit monster set, and then the Maelstrom Inferno. I go back and forth on the Inferno versus the Greatsword in trash. Greatsword is more damage. Inferno lets you use Fiery Rage, which is a better AoE alt. So if we're dropping alts in trash, I like the Inferno. If we're saving alts for bosses, I like the Greatsword. And then I have Zolzon on the body, so on either bar when stuff dies, it'll drop the Zolzon little pillar of light, and you can go pick that up. And that's a super strong buff for 30 seconds. It gives you a ton of extra crit chance and 12% more crit damage, which is just hard to get in trash. Zolzon's a super strong set if there's ads around to die. And then Corpse Burster is the main pillar of Necro right now. All of my setups have Corpse Burster on it. Anytime you consume a corpse, that corpse explodes for a ton of disease damage in an AoE, and that effect can happen every 0.5 seconds, which is basically once every global cooldown you can explode things. The main sources that I use for Corpse Burster, which I have on the front bar, is Detonating Siphon and then Avid Boneyard as well. Both of these will consume a corpse. And then Velothi's great for trash because you're not getting a ton of light attacks off. It gives minor force, so you don't have to worry about trap or something else for that. It increases your damage done to monsters by 15%, which is really strong still. In any AoE situation, Velothi is really, really good. So then I'll talk through the skills and kind of how I think about these. I'll go through in order of how I proc them into a fight. I start before the fight with Proxy Det. This gives you 8 seconds until you explode with magic damage. I only cast this once. I don't recast this. Most of the time trash dies super fast, so you won't have a chance to recast it anyways. Then Skeletal Archer. This stays on your bar just because it does a bit of damage, but also gives you Major Brutality and Sorcery in case you don't have a DK in the group with igneous weapons. It also creates an extra corpse on death. And then when I am a vampire, which if I'm using Toggle, I am, use Blood Mist to proc the vampire passive, Strike from the Shadows. When you leave mist form, your weapon and spell damage is increased by 300 for 6 seconds. This just helps with the opening burst in trash. Then I'll lay down my Blockade of Fire, which is buffed by the Maelstrom Inferno. This is a great AoE damage that also burns the enemies. And then the Maelstrom Inferno adds some penetration, and your Wall of Elements dots deal an increased amount of damage. I just realized I hadn't gone through the traits or the enchants. I'll go through that after the skills. And then I have Shocking Banner on both bars. You have to have this on both bars or it'll turn itself off. In content with most groups, Shocking Banner is going to be your best bet. It buffs the most amount of damage for most groups. If you're running in just a pure Crow setup or something like that, you might want to switch to Sundering Banner, but Shocking's just a good choice overall. For the second piece of the banner, I use the class Mastery passive, which increases your health, magicka, and stamina, which is a damage increase, but also if no corpses are nearby, it creates corpse. So then you can use Corpse Burster a little bit more, which is your main source of damage. And then the last piece is going to be whatever minor buff your raid lead tells you. So minor courage or minor heroism or something like that. Minor buffs on the banner you can give to your group. Major buffs are only to you, so make sure it is a minor buff. Then on the front bar, I got Whirling Blades. I only use this as really an execute, or if there's really no corpses to burst. So not casting this a ton, really just towards the end, because it deals 100% more damage to enemies with less than 50% health. So it has a built-in execute. And then Blighted Blast Bones. This is really what the whole rotation's built around, which we'll get into. But this, you're basically pulling a skeleton up from the ground, and then after 2.5 seconds, it runs and explodes disease damage in an AoE. Does a ton of damage, also creates a corpse, which then you can use Corpse Burster on. Then the main source of Corpse Bursting is Detonating Siphon. This does a long AoE of 20 seconds, but that's not really what you're worried about. It also gives you Major Savagery, increasing your weapon and spell crit. And also, while slotted, your damage done is increased by 3%. So this is doing a ton, but the main thing is that it's triggering Corpse Burster. Then your other source of bursting is Avid Boneyard. This does frost damage over 10 seconds and applies minor vulnerability. It consumes a corpse, which does the corpse bursting to deal 30% more damage. So you don't really want to lay this down unless there's a corpse on the ground to be consumed, which then would trigger corpse burster and make this do 30% more damage. It also gives you the Grave Robber synergy, which does some frost damage. Sometimes raid leads will ask for Unnerving Boneyard instead, which that applies major breach in the area. So it's really helpful to the group. You're only really missing out on you being able to cast the Grave Robber synergy. So it's just a tiny bit of damage loss for yourself. And then again, Shocking Banner, you have to have it on both bars. And then Flawless Dawnbreaker, which we never cast. We just use for the Fighters Guild passives. Slayer, increase your weapon and spell damage by 3% for each Fighters Guild ability slotted, and also Banish the Wicked. You generate 3 ultimate whenever you kill an enemy. Both of those are really strong. Now I'll run through the traits and the enchants, which are the same on all of these setups. It's Divines for the whole body to buff the Thief Mundus Stone, give you more crit. All max stamina glyphs on the body. On the jewelry, Bloodthirsty with a weapon and spell damage enchant. I like Bloodthirsty over Infused on Necro. The damage ramp up with it is just insane. It's kind of leaning into the Crow's already great passives. Death Kneel, increase your critical strike chance against enemies under 33% health by 20%. That's a huge amount in Execute. Then for the daggers, Nirnhond on the main hand, charged on the offhand, fiery weapon and poison weapon. On the back bar, infused weapon damage enchant. I've also seen some people using a befouled weapon enchant on the back bar with still an infused greatsword. That does disease damage, and when you have Morag Tongue in your group, that can be better. I have not yet tried that out though on Crow. I think it might only be better on Nightblade. I'm not sure about that. If you guys know when befouled is better, let me know in the comments, please. So yeah, that's the trash setup. Okay, my main single target boss setup. For this, I'm using Perfected Null Arca, Corpse Burster, and Huntsman War Mask. All the same enchants and glyphs. With the crit chance monster set shoulder. One thing on the monster set is that if you don't have enough pen, you can use a light one here. If you really don't have enough pen, you could switch this out for a one-piece pen, like Scoria or Crag or something like that. So like a one-piece light Scoria would do a ton more pen. Or if your group is already great on pen and you're over pen, you can switch this to a medium Ice Heart or medium Zon, medium Slime Craw, whatever. Medium crit chance monster set. And then I like Huntsman for single target. When you bash an enemy, you mark them for 1 minute, you gain minor berserk, and you also do 15% more damage to that specific target and 50% less damage to all other enemies. I've found that you still do crazy AoE damage still in Huntsman. Then for the skills, the only thing that really changes is I put on Venom Skull as kind of a spammable when you have nothing else to hit. And then back bar Stampede instead of Wall to go with the Great Sword. Barb Trap, which is a decent single target dot, but also it gives you minor force, increasing your crit damage by 10%. And then Carve, which this is a nice shield, but also deals bleed damage, and you can, on your third swipe of this, you can get it to go for 32 seconds. So it's kind of a dot that you don't have to think about towards the end of fights very much. And then for ultimate, you can go Shooting Star or Goliath bashing and do the double bash build. With the groups that I've been running in, we really prioritize ulti generation. So Goliath just wasn't as good as dropping tons and tons of Shooting Stars. You can see on this Naventus fight, I dropped 9 Shooting Stars, which is just crazy. And it ended up being my 3rd overall highest damage. But yeah, but you can switch this out for Goliath Bash, and that does do a lot of AoE damage and a lot of single target damage. It does complicate the rotation a bit, but I've started to really gain the muscle memory of it, and it's not as bad after you spend months doing it. So then my single target boss toggle setup, which this is like max damage. I really just add in Simmering Frenzy and swap out Cleave. While you have this toggled, you increase your weapon and spell damage by 80 every 2 seconds up to 5 times, which is 400 weapon and spell damage. But this costs health every 2 seconds, and the more stacks you have, the more health it costs. But the main thing that makes this tough is that you cannot be healed by anyone else but yourself. So you got to make sure that you know what you're doing in these fights, and you don't need emergency heals, or this will get you killed. Like, I have another Dawnbringer group coming up, and I'm gonna toggle on Yondir and Vrol, but I'm not gonna toggle on Fallgraven. He puts out too much damage on everybody. I'm gonna use Carve to shield against those blasts. So yeah, this is the ultimate super sweaty setup with toggle, and it's the reason why I am a vampire. If I'm not gonna toggle in anything, I'll probably cure myself of vampire, because it lowers your health recovery, it makes you take more flame damage, and your abilities cost a lot more, which just isn't very fun when you're already running banner, which costs some magicka and stamina. You definitely don't have to cure yourself if you're not running it, but I like to cure myself when I'm not running vampire skills. Okay, so then I have kind of a mixed hybrid setup, a single target / AoE setup. For this, I'm using Corpse Burster, Azure Blight, and Mora's Whisper. Azure Blight is a ton of damage if there's ads that it can proc on. So the 5-piece does dealing damage over time, applies a stack of Blight Seed to the target for 5 seconds. At 20 stacks, Blight Seed explodes, dealing 5,538 disease damage to the target and nearby enemies, increasing by 150% per additional monster hit, up to 600%. So if there's 5 or 6 ads stacked, this does a ton of damage. If there's not a bunch of ads stacked on the boss, I would take Azure Blight off and use Null Arca instead. One more note about Azure Blight that I forgot to mention: it takes 20 more stacks for it to explode per group member wearing this set. So it can just be finicky if multiple people are wearing it. So I prefer to be the only one wearing it, or I'll just switch to Null Arca if somebody else wants to run it. But then for this kind of in-between setup, I kind of rate this as in between Huntsman and Velothi as far as single target versus AoE. If single target is Huntsman and AoE is Velothi, Mora's Whisper is kind of in the middle. This gives you a ton of extra critical chance, which is really, really nice on a Necro. The hard part about Mora's Whisper is that the crit chance bonus is based on how many of the books of Shalador's library you've read on that specific character. It is not account-wide, it is character specific. So if I wanted to run this on a different character, I would have to go farm lore books on them. You can't buy it in the Crown Store. You actually have to go do all the lore books on the character you want to run this on, which is a hassle. Now that I'm a little ways out from farming this, I think it was worth it. Right after farming it, I was like, there's no way this is worth it. But yeah, Mora's Whisper, kind of in between for the AoE. The bars are the same exact setup, CP, everything else is the same, all the same, just switching around the mythic. And then for a heavily AoE cleave fight, that's when I would use Velothi. And then you just have to move around stuff so you have 5-piece Corpse Burster still. And with this, I use Azure Blight and Corpse Burster, Velothi, and all the rest of the stuff the same, except I take off Trap and put on Anti-Cavalry Caltrops, because Velothi already has Minor Force baked into it, so you don't need Trap, and this is an AoE fight setup, so Caltrops is really strong in an AoE setup. And then the final setup that I don't use much, because like I said, my groups prioritize Ult Gen, is the Shattered Path Signet. This does a ton of damage, it's really strong. I might end up trying it on Fallgraven in this next Dawnbringer group. But this setup is really when you don't want to have to think about too much. You don't have to think about your ults, because you don't want to ever ult with this. You just have Dawnbreaker on both bars for the Fighter Guild passives on both bars. And then I even take off Carve when I run this and just put on Camo Hunter, so it's just easier. You can have Carve instead of Camo Hunter. It's just when I want to turn my brain off and just do the Blast Bones, Siphon, Boneyard stuff, then I'll just use this setup simpler. And yeah, so like I said, when you run this, you just don't ult. So then you always have over 133 ultimate, so your light and heavy attacks apply a random status effect, and your status effects are also buffed by 1% for every one ultimate you have, up to 130. Okay, for the rotation and priority, the easiest way to think about this is to think about Blast Bones as the metronome for everything else. So the basic rotation and rhythm is Blast Bones, skill, skill, Blast Bones, skill, skill, repeating. As long as you're staying in melee range, Blast Bones will be ready again every time. And this is a melee build, so if you get too far away from the boss, the Blast Bones takes longer to run to the target and just starts throwing off the entire rotation. So in practice, that is just light attack, Blast Bones, light attack, skill, light attack, skill, light attack, Blast Bones, light attack, skill, light attack, skill, light attack, Blast Bones, and repeating. You can see it gets ready right before I'm about to hit it every time. So in that skill window, the ultimate also counts as one of those skills. Goliath can sometimes take a bit longer because the transformation animation, but you can still fit one more skill after it before the Blast Bones. So that would be Blast Bones, Goliath, another skill, Blast Bones. And once you have that rhythm down, everything else is just deciding what goes in those 2 skill slots between the Blast Bones. And then as far as priority for that, the first thing I prioritize is carve stacks because they're annoying if they fall off. The first swipe, you get a 12-second dot. The second swipe, it goes up to 22 seconds, and the third swipe is 32 seconds. You don't want to just swipe them all in a row. You want to use the full 12 seconds, the full 22 seconds, and then just keep up the 32 seconds. But if you let the timer fall off, you have to restart at 12 seconds, which is just annoying. So carve is really only good if you can keep the stacks up. If you keep letting them fall off, you have to use a global cooldown to proc it way too much, and it becomes not worth it. After carve is stampede. Stampede gives you a 12% damage bonus to your direct damage because of the Maelstrom Greatsword, and most of your damage is direct damage, so you really want to keep a good uptime on this. Then next is trap. Trap gives you minor force, is also a solid single target dot. You can switch this out for a contingency skill with force on it for like an AoE fight. So like bloody contingency or really any kind of damage, and then lingering and then force, and that can replace this and give a little bit more AoE damage, but then you're losing out on the Fighters Guild passives, so there's some give and take there. After trap is boneyard, either morph, and the important thing with this is that you never want to cast it without a corpse available to consume. When you consume a corpse, it does 30% more damage and triggers corpse burster. If you cast it without a corpse, you lose both of those things. One easy way to tell whether a corpse is available or not is to look at siphon. If siphon is lit up and you're able to press it, then there's a usable corpse down there. If it's not lit up, there's not a corpse. That's how you can tell when to cast your boneyard or not. So if you look right now, there's no corpse to consume and my siphon is dark, but if I make a corpse down there, now it is lit up. Now there's a corpse to consume. If I use boneyard, it consumed that corpse, procced corpse burster, and now is doing 30% more damage. After boneyard is skeletal archer. The archer gives you major brutality, which increases your weapon damage by 20%. This is just really important if you don't have a DK running igneous weapons. It also does some pretty good single target damage, and that damage ramps up over time. So each attack that it does 15% more damage. So you do not want to recast this early, and it only creates a corpse if that 20-second timer runs all the way out. If you recast it early, you lose out on the damage ramping up, and you lose out on the corpse that it would create for corpse burster. Now, once all of those dots are up, then still in that blastbone skill rotation, then you're deciding between siphon and skull. Basically, if siphon is lit up, hit siphon and proc corpse burster. If it's not, then you can hit venom skull just as a filler until you can proc another siphon. Siphon and corpse burster is significantly more damage than a fully buffed venom skull, so you always want to prioritize corpse bursting over venom skull. It's important to know what skills make corpses. Like if boneyard is about to run out and I don't have a corpse down there, then I can do blast bones, venom skull, and then I know that a buffed venom skull will create a corpse, so then I know that I can immediately use a boneyard and it'll be buffed and corpse burst. Also, one intricacy about venom skull is that you don't technically have to get to 3 stacks to then cast it for the 50% increased damage. You just have to get to 2 because it counts itself as a Necromancer ability. So here I am at 1 stack down there. Now I'm at 2. I won't get to 3 if I cast skull right here. It'll restart because it counts itself. So boom, that was a fully buffed skull. So if I do 2 other Necromancer abilities, 2 means fully buffed. But if I skip that and now it's at 3, that's still the same thing, fully buffed. So you'll almost never be casting a non-fully buffed skull, even if you don't think about it. There is another option other than Venom Skull. You can run Ghostly Embrace. This is a really good option for AoE fights or bosses with huge hitboxes. It puts out these 3 big AoE blasts, and if all 3 hit your single target, then they do more damage than a fully buffed skull. Like maybe the Sunspire dragons have big enough hitboxes for it, but also keep in mind that in AoE settings, Skull is also buffing your AoE damage because it is a Gravelord ability, and every Gravelord ability slotted gives 10% more damage for your corpse bursting. So even though Skull is single target, it does add to your AoE damage. The other kind of silly thing about Ghostly Embrace is that if your target dummy is up against a wall, all 3 of the embraces automatically hit because they bounce off the wall and all stay in the same spot. You can see all 3 of them hit. Kind of cheesy, but it works. Okay, to quickly wrap all this up, because I know I added in a bunch of stuff. Within that Blastbone skill rotation, those 2 skills, the priority in there, first is maintaining carve stacks, then stampede, then trap, then boneyard, but only with the corpse to burst, then archer. Then once all of that is up and handled and ticking, all those dots are going, then you're just choosing between siphon if there's a corpse and skull if there's not. And at the very end of execute, you can start letting some of those dots fall off. If the boss is about to die, there's no point in refreshing a dot that's not going to finish. And at that point, I'm mostly just trying to burst as many corpses as possible anyways. And eventually, you also need to stop casting blast bones in the last couple seconds of a fight, because the boss is going to die before it can run and explode. But that's really just the final couple seconds, and it depends how fast your group is burning. So yeah, that's the main rotation with a couple skill options in there. I also want to go through some defensive skill options. If you need a heal, you can replace carve with resistant flesh. This is a really good heal that costs magicka. It can also heal an ally in a pinch, and it gives physical and spell resistance. It's a really great heal for when I'm going off alone in portals or something like that. The other option is vigor, and that costs stamina instead. So being a stam crow, sometimes it's easier just to run vigor if you're not having any stam problems, but there's not really much that we use magicka for, so that's why I kind of like leaning towards resistant flesh when I need a heal. And then my Arkasis and ulti pull setup. This is definitely not for boss fights. It's only really for the last trash pack before a boss to top off your ultimate. What Arkasis does is whenever you drink a potion, you and the 3 group members closest to you gain 44 ultimate, and that's just really strong when your group stacks it all together. So you can do 3 separate Arkasis stacks for your 12-person group, and everybody can get a ton of ultimate if you're all running Arkasis. And so I have this set up in a trash sort of setup because that's what we were using it for in my last trifecta run. I just have this paired with null arca. It doesn't really matter because you're just in trash. You could just keep corpse burster on, or what would probably be the best is Zolzon. So then you could also take a Zolzon proc into that boss. Now that I think about it, I'm going to change that to Zolzon. And then because this is an ulti gen setup, I have necrotic potency, which when you use this to consume a corpse, you get ultimate. So really you can just keep consuming corpse after corpse and get a ton of ultimate with this. Super fast. This just makes crazy fast ulti gen. A note on Arkasis is that it's a heavy armor set, so you really want the daggers and the jewelry and then one piece on the body, so you can just have the least amount of heavy armor as possible because it doesn't add any damage benefits. And then finally, how I pre-buff with this setup is I just throw on a bow on the front bar and a staff on the back bar. It doesn't matter what your gear is, it doesn't matter what sets you're in, because you're not going to be doing damage in it at all. This is just before the fight starts. I put on Scalding Rune and Wall on my back bar, and then leave my trap and archer in the same spots they're on. I put Endless Hail on the front bar, and I leave Boneyard in the same spot it is. So then when I switch to my boss setup, trap and archer and Boneyard are still running, and I don't have to reproc them. You could also switch out Siphon and Blast Bones for some other pre-buffs like Mystic Orb or Trapping Webs or stuff like that too. I just find when I simplify my pre-buff, I typically do it a little bit better. Before we get into the parse, I want to talk through Goliath double bash weaving. So you got to take all of the stuff that I talked about with the priorities and the blast bone skill rotation, and then into that you need to add in a bash bash. So I'm going to do this a little bit slower just to make sense of it. You can do light attack, blast bones, bash bash, light attack, skill, bash bash, light attack, skill, bash bash, light attack, blast bones, bash bash. Hope that makes sense. But then sped up, here's what that looks like. And honestly, this double bashing feels awful the first time you do it. It's crazy, especially if you've never single bash weaved before. This is a pretty large jump in difficulty in this rotation. And also the key bindings for this are really important. I play on controller on PC, so I can remap my bash button. I remapped it to my back right paddle on my controller, so it's very easy for me to bash, and I don't have to block then bash like normal controllers. I know on console it's not as easy to re-keybind, so I don't think this actually works for console. and I'm honestly not certain what people with mouse and keyboard do for bashing. I've heard some use their scroll wheel. I've even heard of people using their spacebar or alt button. So if you're new to Necro, just forget about bashing for now and just learn the rotation with Blastbone skill repeating. With Shooting Star first, I use that probably 75 to 80% of the time in most of my raids, and it's totally fine, especially if your group is built upon Ult Gen, which is really strong this patch. So bash weaving does not make or break the Crow. In my mind, I kind of think of it as a high risk, high reward setup. It's harder to do, it can be complex and difficult, but then you do a bit more damage. So first, here's my parse without any bash weaving or vampire toggle or ghostly embrace, none of that stuff. This is just the straightforward what I actually take into raid. The only change I've made is I switched fighting finesse for backstabber because it's a little bit more crit damage. And then right after that, I will show a Goliath bash parse. I chose this first one in particular because I thought it was a good representation of the priority order of skills, not necessarily the highest damage parse I've done with this setup, just the best like clean priority following the order that I set. So yeah, here it goes. Thanks so much for watching. Catch you in the next one. Peace.
Bye.